Rain hit the glass doors of Myri Group headquarters in sheets as employees rushed through the lobby, umbrellas dripping, heels striking marble. Then the doors opened again. Tiana Stevens walked in carrying a white luxury cake box in one hand and a garment bag over her shoulder, calm in a way that made people look twice. Long black coat, elegant heels, completely unhurried. She was heading toward the private elevator when a polished voice stopped her. "Excuse me." The woman who stepped forward wore authority like expensive tailoring, perfect navy suit, controlled smile, executive composure. "Deliveries are handled through the service entrance." Tiana looked at her. "I'm not staff." The executive's eyes moved over the cake box and garment bag. "Then you're lost." "No," Tiana said evenly. "I'm here to meet Kang Diyun." A few nearby employees slowed. Everyone at Myri knew the CEO personally approved almost no one. The woman gave a small laugh. "The CEO does not schedule meetings with people carrying pastry boxes." Ji-won gestured lightly toward the service hallway. "If you'll just cooperate, don't do that." The interruption was soft enough that several nearby employees looked over automatically. Ji-won blinked. "Excuse me." Tiana adjusted the strap of the garment bag on her shoulder and looked at her calmly. "Don't speak to me like I'm beneath you, because you think you can just talk to anybody how you want." Ji-won's expression tightened slightly. "You seem to be misunderstanding." Tiana set the cake box carefully on the marble floor. "No," she said evenly. "I understand perfectly." The woman blinked. Tiana held her gaze. "You weren't trying to help me," she said evenly. "You were trying to put me in my place, right?" Nobody moved. The private elevator opened before she could answer. Kang Diyun stepped out and the lobby reorganized around him. He didn't look at anyone else. He walked straight to Tiana, removed his coat, and placed it over her shoulders himself, so matter-of-fact it landed harder than anything theatrical could have. "Why are you still downstairs?" he asked. "I told them to bring you straight up." Diyun seemed to register the room for the first time. His eyes moved to the cake box sitting on the marble floor, then to the executive standing beside her. Back to Tiana. Tiana's voice stayed conversational. "Your executive seems to think I work for the catering staff." Something cold settled across his face. "Everybody back to work," he said quietly. Nobody moved fast enough. "You too, Ji-won." 2 words. In front of everyone. Ji-won felt the blood leave her face. She had never, not once in 4 years at this company, been dismissed by him in public. She held herself together by discipline alone as she turned and walked toward the executive corridor. Then he looked at Tiana again. "Come upstairs." And together, they stepped into the private elevator while the lobby stood frozen behind them. What Kang Diyun does after publicly embarrassing his own executive changes all 3 of their lives forever. And if it's your first time here, subscribe and stay with me. "You don't need to apologize," Tiana said, before Diyun could get the words out. The elevator moved upward in silence that was expensive and smooth. He had turned slightly toward her. She was looking at the doors. "She represents my company," he said. "She represents herself." "People usually do." She glanced at him then. "The apology isn't yours to make." He studied her the way he studied things that surprised him, with focus that didn't pretend to be casual. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't rehearsing what to say next. She wasn't angling for sympathy or storing the incident as leverage. She had simply filed it away and moved on, and that kind of composure, in his experience, was either deeply learned or deeply earned. By the time they reached the executive floor, his curiosity had sharpened into something else. The meeting room was glass-walled and filled with 6 of his senior investors and 3 hotel development partners. They had expected a vendor presentation. What they got was Tiana Stevens setting a luxury cake sample at the center of the table without fanfare, opening a portfolio that made 2 of the older executives lean forward involuntarily, and proceeding to walk them through a partnership vision for Stevens Noir that reframed what a hotel luxury experience could mean. She didn't oversell. She didn't perform enthusiastically. She presented the way people present when they already know the answer and are simply giving the room time to catch up. Stevens Noir wasn't a dessert company. It was a luxury experience architecture firm that happened to work in edible mediums, custom installations, event environments, tasting experiences built to match the emotional identity of a brand. She had catered private dinners for heads of state, 2 celebrity weddings that year, a gallery opening in Milan that the press had described as a masterpiece of atmospheric design. By the 20-minute mark, the room had fully shifted. Investors who had walked in prepared to be politely underwhelmed were now asking about exclusivity terms. Outside the glass wall, Ji-won stood still and watched. She had come to observe. She had expected to feel superior to whatever was happening in that room. Instead, she watched Tiana command a table of people who were used to commanding rooms, and something cold and certain settled in Ji-won's chest. This woman was far more dangerous than she had initially understood. Ji-yoon kept finding reasons. That was the honest way to describe what happened over the following 3 weeks. Business meetings that should have concluded in 40 minutes ran to 2 hours. He sent questions by message that he clearly already knew the answers to. He requested her opinion on a hotel interior concept in Busan that had nothing to do with their partnership scope. Tiana noticed all of it. She found it interesting rather than flattering. One afternoon, he presented an expansion proposal for the Singapore property, a tiered luxury tier pricing model that had an obvious structural flaw in the demographic targeting. She caught it on the first reading. "You already knew this wouldn't work," she said, without looking up from the document. "What makes you say that?" "Because you don't miss things like this." She set the papers down. "This is a test." He leaned back slightly. "Maybe I wanted to hear you explain why. You test everybody?" "Only people I find interesting." She looked at him across the table for a moment. Not warmly, not coldly. Assessingly. Then she went back to the document. The demographic targeting assumes premium travelers in the 35 to 50 bracket will pay 30% more for a designation that means nothing to them culturally. They won't. You'd need a different entry point, something experiential rather than categorical. She turned a page. "You already know this." "I did," he said. "I just wanted to see if you'd say it without hesitation." She didn't take the bait. He noticed she never performed modesty. She simply didn't engage with flattery that she considered beside the point. What changed things was a Tuesday evening. The meeting had run late. Papers covered half the table. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling window sole glittered in the dark, busy and indifferent. He had been on 3 calls before this one and hadn't eaten since morning. She was reviewing projected timelines with a pencil in her hand, and she never said anything about it. She didn't ask if he was hungry, didn't suggest a break, didn't make a moment out of it. She simply paused, reached into the portfolio case beside her chair, and removed a small wrapped dessert sample from that afternoon's tasting. She cut it cleanly in half without ceremony and slid half across the table toward him while her eyes stayed on the document she was reading. No speech. No softness. Just instinctive, uncomplicated care. He looked at it. Then at her. She was already moving her pencil down the page. He ate it in silence. He wasn't used to being taken care of without it being negotiated. That landed harder than anything she had said to him in 3 weeks of meetings. Ji-won watched it all from the edges. She was careful about it. She had too much professional pride to be caught watching. But she noticed the way his schedule reorganized around Tiana's availability without anyone having to ask. She noticed that he smiled in the glass meeting room in a way he didn't smile in board sessions. She heard employees whispering in the way employees whisper when they sense something is shifting at the top and nobody has announced it yet. Ji-won had been at Mafia Group for 4 years. For 4 years, she had been close to Ji-yoon in the way proximity creates its own kind of intimacy, shared late nights, shared pressure, shared language around the company they were both building. Nothing had ever been stated between them, but she had believed that eventually it would be her. Watching him be effortlessly, naturally pulled toward another woman was not grief. It was something harder and more corrosive than grief. It was the specific devastation of realizing you had been waiting for something that was never on its way. The Mafia luxury hotel launch party occupied the top 2 floors of their flagship Seoul property. Investors moved in clusters. Journalists who had been approved for access held their champagne carefully. The lighting had been designed to make everyone look slightly better than they were. Ji-won stood near the East Terrace when she overheard the conversation. 2 investors, unconcerned about being listened to, standing against the railing with their glasses raised toward the dessert installation at the room center, a cascading architectural structure in deep amber and black that Tiana's team had built that afternoon. "Stevens Noir is valued higher than 3 of Mairi's subsidiaries, you know." The other man nodded. Diyun pursued the partnership personally for nearly a year. Flew to New York himself. She turned him down the first time. The first one left. She turned him down. Can you imagine? Ji-won set her glass down on the nearest surface before she dropped it. She turned him down. He had flown to New York. Nearly a year. While Ji-won had been here, in this building, in this company, present and capable and waiting, he had been quietly, persistently pursuing a woman who had initially told him no. She found Tiana near the terrace doors an hour later. You enjoy this, Ji-won said. Tiana turned. Her expression was neutral. Enjoy what, specifically? Making people look small. No, Tiana's voice was even. But insecure people usually feel small around confident women. That part isn't mine to manage. Ji-won felt something crack behind her sternum. You think because he's fascinated with you. I think you're angry at the wrong person. The words were so direct and so calm that Ji-won stopped breathing for a moment. He chose where to place his attention, Tiana said. Not me. I didn't take anything from you. You need to be honest with yourself about what was yours to begin with. Ji-won's composure fractured at the edges. She turned and walked away before it could fully collapse in public. 3 days later. The rooftop was quiet above the city. He had arranged dinner up here without making it into an announcement. A table, candles, the kind of detail that costs thought rather than money. The sky was dark and beginning to soften at its edges with the earliest suggestion of rain. They had finished eating. The plates had been cleared. They sat in comfortable silence that had stopped needing to be filled. You walk into rooms, Diyun said finally, like you expect nobody to save you. Tiana looked at him. She didn't deflect or perform modesty. Nobody ever did, she said. I think you stopped needing it. A long time ago. She was quiet for a moment. It gets easier when you stop leaving room for it. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the sharp focus of a man doing business. Not the cool authority of a man who controlled rooms. Something underneath all of that, quieter and more real. I like you, Tiana, he said. Simple. Direct. No performance around it. She was still for a moment. The city spread below them, luminous and indifferent. The first drops of rain began, soft and unhurried, barely there. I like you too, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, and when he kissed her, the rain came properly, neither of them moving to avoid it. Ji-won found out. She saw them walking through the executive floor corridor, not touching, not announcing anything, but close. The way he glanced at Tiana when she said something was a way Ji-won had never seen him glance at anyone. She went home. She sat in her apartment for a long time. And then she made the worst decision of her life. The event was the centerpiece of Stevens Noir's expansion into the Korean market, a large-scale international showcase at a venue in central Seoul that had been 18 months in preparation. Industry press. International buyers. A room full of people who mattered to Tiana's company's future. 72 hours before the event, things began to dissolve. Ji-won told herself it wasn't sabotage. It was risk control. If Tiana failed publicly, the board would finally see what Ji-won had always seen, that Diyun was making an emotional decision, not a strategic one. A primary vendor called to say their order had been cancelled from Tiana's account, which she had not done. The installation shipment from the Paris studio was delayed at customs over documentation errors that had not existed a week ago. And on the morning of the event, the full presentation file, backed up in 3 locations, had been corrupted. Every location. Simultaneously. Tiana's team was in controlled panic. Tiana was not. She worked the phones for 9 straight hours. She sourced alternative vendors. She rebuilt critical presentation sections from secondary files, from memory, from photographs on her team's phones. She reorganized the room layout around what she had rather than what was missing. She made several decisions in 4 hours that her team would later describe, individually, as the thing that saved the event. The showcase opened 40 minutes late. By the end of the night, nobody in the audience knew what the original version had looked like. But the event had cracked in visible places. Coverage mentioned logistical difficulties. One buyer who had been close to signing pulled back to observe another quarter. The night should have been a triumph, and it was instead a survival. Across the city, In his home office, Diyun received a quiet briefing from his head of operations. He listened. He asked 3 specific questions. Then he made a call. He investigated quietly, the way he did everything that mattered. He pulled vendor records. He traced the cancellation orders back through systems. He found the messages, carefully obscured, but not carefully enough, not from someone who had acted in rage rather than strategy. He sat with what he found for a long time. The boardroom meeting was already heated when Diyun walked in. 7 executives around the table. The event failure had created contractual complications and 2 investors were threatening to revisit their miry partnership terms. The prevailing mood in the room before his arrival was that Stevens Noir had been an embarrassing misalignment of values and the partnership should be quietly reconsidered. Diyun walked in cold. He set a folder on the table without opening it and let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. The event failure was not a logistical failure, he said. It was deliberate interference. Nobody spoke. He opened the folder. Vendor cancellation records showing the request origin. System access logs. 3 message threads that established both the instruction and the intent, clearly, without ambiguity. He did not look at Ji-won while he placed each document on the table. Ji-won was perfectly still. The room read the documents in a silence that was absolute. Diyun watched their faces move through confusion to understand something cold and uncomfortable. Ji-won didn't make excuses. She didn't claim it was a misunderstanding. She looked at the documents on the table and the mask she had worn for 4 years simply came off, quietly, in front of everyone. Her composure broke without drama. It just broke. Tears came slowly, not for effect, because she had stopped being able to hold them. Diyun looked at her for the first time since he entered. You had more value in this company than you gave yourself credit for, he said. His voice was not cruel. It was something worse, it was honest. This wasn't necessary. Then he straightened and addressed the room. If Tiana Stevens walks away from this company because of what happened in that room, he paused. I walk with her. Complete silence. One of the senior board members started to say something and stopped himself. Because they all understood what that meant. Kang Diyun was Myri Group in the ways that mattered. His name, his relationships, his singular ability to read the market were the engine under everything they had built. If he walked, the investors followed. If the investors followed, they had a building and a board and nothing else. Ji-won understood something else. She looked at him across the table and understood, fully and finally, that she had not lost because Tiana was clever or strategic or manipulative. She had not lost because life was unfair. She had lost because he genuinely loved this woman in the specific and irrational and unstoppable way that real love worked, and no amount of proximity or patience or waiting on Ji-won's part would have changed that. She had been fighting something that was never actually a fight. She came alone. 3 weeks after the boardroom, Ji-won appeared at the door of Stevens Noir's Seoul studio. She had called ahead. Tiana had said yes. They sat across from each other in the studio space, surrounded by early designs for the next installation, and the conversation that happened between them was quiet and honest. I know sorry doesn't cover it, Ji-won said. No, Tiana agreed. It doesn't. But it's where you start. Ji-won looked at her hands. I don't fully understand why I'm here. Asking you to forgive me doesn't undo what I did to your event. No, it doesn't. Tiana's voice wasn't warm and it wasn't cold. It was steady. But you're here and you're honest about it. That's not nothing. Ji-won was quiet for a moment. I kept telling myself I was angry at you. It was easier. I know. Tiana looked at her directly. You needed to hate me because it hurt less than accepting that he didn't love you the same way. That's human. It doesn't make what you did okay, but it's human. The thing that finally broke Ji-won apart was not the accountability. It was the compassion she had not expected from this particular woman. Tiana didn't say it to be generous. She said it because it was true, and because she had enough self-possession to give it without needing anything back. Ji-won cried quietly. Tiana moved from her chair and sat beside her and put an arm around her, and Ji-won cried into the shoulder of the woman she had tried to destroy, and neither of them said anything for a long while. Weeks passed. The grand opening of Myri's newest property was the largest event the company had mounted that year. A full hotel in Gangnam, 60 floors, an architectural statement, the kind of building that changed the neighborhood's sense of itself. The lobby alone had been featured in 3 design publications before the doors even opened. Inside that lobby, at the center of it all, was the installation. It rose from the floor in deep amber and obsidian, shaped like something between architecture and nature, organic and precise at once. Light moved through it in a way that changed with the hour. Guests moved around it slowly, drawn in, raising their phones, and then slowly lowering them because it was one of those things that cameras couldn't fully hold. A small placard to its left read, "A permanent installation by Stevens Noir." Duyun stood beside Tiana in the lobby watching guests discover it. He was not looking at the installation. He was looking at her face while she watched it. The particular, unguarded expression she got when something she had made was out in the world doing what she designed it to do. That quiet, private satisfaction that she almost never let people see. He had learned to watch for it. "You belonged here," he said, quietly enough that only she heard it, "from the first moment you walked in." She turned to look at him. "And you knew that?" Her voice was amused, slightly skeptical in the way she was with things she found almost too convenient to believe. "I knew it before you did." He said it without drama or decoration. "I knew it before I had any right to know it." She looked at him for a moment, that assessing, honest look that had made him feel, from their very first conversation, like she was reading something in him that he had stopped expecting anyone to notice. Then something softened in her face. The guard she carried so naturally, not defensively, but just as a feature of who she was, it didn't go down exactly. It didn't need to. She simply let him stand close enough to it that it didn't matter. He kissed her forehead, and she closed her eyes, and around them the grand opening continued in all its extravagant noise, champagne and conversation, the soft music from the upper mezzanine. The quiet marvel of a room full of people encountering something beautiful for the first time. She reached up without ceremony and took his hand. He held it like he wasn't planning to let go. "Tell me honestly, was Ji-won truly evil, or was she just a woman who loved too late?" And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss more emotional stories like this.